All right, so continuing on from the previous video, we talked about this. We talked about the intervals on the real number line. We talked about unbounded and bounded intervals and how unbounded is going to use infinity and negative infinity. We also talked about parentheses and brackets. Now let's do some examples together. And these are examples from your book. And we're going to just graph some of these. Okay, we're going to graph these together so that we can get a good idea of what they should look like. Okay, so let's start with x is less than or equal to 2. Now, whenever we're graphing, super important that you think about, are we going to be using parentheses, right? Are we going to be using parentheses or are we going to be using brackets? And that's pretty much the first question you can ask yourself, all right? In this case, all you have to do is look at the inequality. The inequality will tell you if you will be using parentheses or brackets. This one has an or equal to. And because it has an or equal to, you know you are going to be using brackets, okay? Now, are you going to be using 2 brackets or are you going to be using 1 bracket? And that depends if it is bounded or unbounded. In this case, we only have one constant and we have our variable, okay? Since we only have one constant as opposed to like this question over here, you have 2 different constants, okay? We know that this x is not going to be trapped within 2 variables, okay? It's only going to be going in one direction on the graph. That means that x is less than or equal to 2. X can be anything on the number line that is less than or equal to 2, okay? So because of that, we know this is going to be unbounded. So we know it's going to go on forever in one direction, which means that it is going to use infinity. All right. Since it uses infinity or negative infinity, we know that it is going to be unbounded. Okay. So this one is going to be unbounded. All right. Now let's think about where we're going to go ahead and put this on the graph. Okay, first things first, make sure that whenever you're making a number line, you have the number line, you have your origin, the 0, okay? And with this, I would say it would even be okay to just go ahead and find out what the value is and put a negative and a positive of that same value. We don't want to go ahead and take too much time drawing a whole bunch of numbers. You don't need to include every number on the number line. I just need a positive and a negative. Best way to do that is to just include the one that they've already given you, okay? Now, we have to ask ourselves, how do we graph that x is less than or equal to 2? First thing we need to know, we're going to be using brackets, right? We said we're going to be using a bracket. Now, the best way to graph this, okay, is to make sure that your variable stays on the left side of your inequality, okay? If you have the left side and you have the right side, keep your variable on the left side. Why? Because then your inequality will make an arrow for you of where you're supposed to go on the graph. So what does that mean? You see this little outline arrow right here going like that? Once we translate that onto the graph over here, this is 2. Here's 2. X is anything that is less than or equal to 2. Since it's less than or equal to 2, we're going to go ahead and draw a bracket on the 2 because it is including 2. And then we're going to draw an arrow that goes all the way to negative infinity. Why? Because x is less than or equal to 2. Okay? Now, normally we would draw this, this graph on the number line, right? But I want you guys to be able to see it a little bit better, so I drew it over the number line. Either way is okay with me. You can draw it on the number line, right? Like you can draw it like this. That's fine. I just need to be able to see that that's your answer. So it's probably a little bit better to draw it on top of the number line, okay? So I hope you were able to understand that. Keep your x, right? Keep your value on the left side, and then your arrow will tell you where to go. So we run into a little bit of a problem in this next problem here, right? Here we have negative 3 is less than x. So right off the bat, we know that there's a negative 3, so we're going to go ahead and put negative 3 on the number line, and we're going to put 3 on the number line because we always want to include something. There is only one constant, so we know it's going to be unbounded, which means that we're either going to use negative infinity or infinity, right? Next, we have to look and see what the inequality tells us. Is this an or equal to? No, right? There's no or equal to, so we know that we are going to use parentheses. All right? So we basically have everything we need now to be able to graph this. We know that we're starting at -3. We're starting at -3 here. And -3 is going to be less than x. Now, we run into a little bit of a problem. Now, since our 3 is on the left side, the arrow is not going to tell us where to go. One thing that we could do is that we can switch their location. We can put the x over here, we can put the -3 over here, but then you have to make sure that you flip the inequality symbol. Okay, so if you're going to move the x over here on this side, and you're going to move the -3 over here on this side, you have to flip that inequality. Okay, right? It makes sense. If -3 is less than x, then it makes sense that x is greater than -3. Keep your inequality on the left side, and now the arrow will tell you which way to go. Okay, you start at -3, you start with a parentheses, and then you follow the arrow up, because x is going to be greater than -3. Let's try to translate that into a graph, but using this up here, and we'll get the same exact answer, right? X is greater than -3 if you read it from left to right. If you read it from right to left, if you read it from left to right, -3 is going to be less than x, okay? That means that x will go all the way down up until it reaches -3, and it won't include -3. That's why we use the parentheses. Okay, if you keep the variable on the left side, it'll make your life a lot easier. Moving on to the next one. Okay, a couple things to ask ourselves again. First of all, is it bounded or is it unbounded? Here we have two constants and we have a variable in between them. We know that that's going to mean that it is bounded. All right, that means we are not going to use infinity. Okay, we're not going to use infinity or negative infinity. It's going to stay within that. Now, sometimes it may use infinity or negative infinity if you have two variables, and I'll show you that soon. But in this case, we don't have that. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you what to do next. Now, are you going to use parentheses or are you going to use brackets? Well, if you look right here, this is going to be parentheses right here, and this right here is going to be brackets. So you're going to actually end up using both. So let's just go ahead and put our x values where we think they go. The smallest part, so the least part of this graph is going to be at -3. So I'm going to go ahead and on the number line, put -3. Now I could put 3 up here, but that might be probably a little bit unnecessary because I can just put the 1, right? In my class, I only make you have a positive and a negative. I don't really care too much where it is, which one it is, as long as you prove to me that the value that you're picking is the value from here, okay? Or the value that's correct. So if you look, the best way to do this is to think about two different relationships. Let's start with one relationship right here, which is that -3 is less than x. And then the second relationship would be this one right here, that x is greater than or equal to, x is less than or equal to 1. Let's actually start with this one since the x is already on the left side. Since x is less than or equal to 1, we're going to go ahead and draw that over here. We know that x is less than or equal to 1. X is on the left side of this relationship right here. So we're going to go ahead and use a bracket at this 1, and we know that the x is going to go that way. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and draw an arrow because an arrow means it goes on that way forever. But we know that it doesn't because it's bounded. So bounded means no arrows. Okay? Now, next relationship, which is this one, -3 is less than x. We could just think about that kind of like we did up here, right? Where we say, okay, -3 is the endpoint on this side, and it is going to be an open endpoint, so we just go ahead and draw that. All right. Another way that you can do it is you can do what we did up here, and you can go ahead and flip the whole thing into x is greater than -3, just for this relationship. Okay. Whenever you have a bounded interval, you probably want to look at each relationship on its own, okay, and then translate it into the graph. Here you see that x is greater than -3, so you can go ahead and draw that. And then this is going to be your interval, and that's going to be how I would like to see your answer, okay? You can draw more points on the graph, that's totally fine with me, or this is fine as well. Moving on, this is the last one that we're going to do. 0 is less than x, which is less than 2. Right off the bat, let's go ahead and let's draw that. We already have 0 on there, so we don't need to draw any negative points. But we're going to go ahead and draw point number 2 right here. Is it bounded or unbounded? It's going to be bounded in this case. All right, which means no arrows, no infinities. And in this case, we don't even have any brackets. We're only going to have parentheses, okay? And this one's pretty easy to see. Whenever you have an x in between two values and they're both kind of facing the same direction, this is pretty simple. The inequalities are facing the same direction. 0 is less than x and x is less than 2. That means that x is going to be trapped right in between 0 and 2, okay? So we can go ahead and draw that really easily. 0 to 2. Those are our two endpoints. The values here are our two endpoints from 0 to 2. That means that x can be anywhere between that. It can be 0.00038. It can be 0.1. It can be 1. It can be 1.4. It can be 1.99999. What it cannot be is 0 or 2 because it has the parentheses, okay? So here really quick, the answers to each one of those graphs. I hope that this helped. We're going to go on in the next video to finding out about the properties of linear inequalities.